Two, check. All right, let's see. Okay. Test 1, 2. All right, test 1, 2. Check, check, check. Stretch. Good, nice stretch. Good morning day. Oh my goodness. We did all the recordings yesterday with a class live, and I downloaded all the videos, and it was horrible resolution. So now I got to talk to a camera without people here. Oh man, I hate that. But I'm going to get used to it actually. I'm going to get used to talking in front of a camera. So we're going to start recording the introduction for the Thrivalist course again. And I get to do it by myself. That's okay. So we're going to do this and get it done. Get a little bit of water. Switch down my Cafe Rio that I ate this morning that I had leftovers from yesterday. And we get to get started. Yay. This is video number 2. Let's get started. Okay, we're on video number 2 of the introduction, and I'm going to actually take some time to give you an overview of the 7 steps of the Thrivalist course. And it's really easy. It starts out with a risk assessment, then it gets to sudden emergencies and evacuation, water preparedness, food preparedness, meet your other needs, maintain your standard of living, and help others prepare, and community building. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about each one so you understand it. Let's start with risk assessment. A risk assessment when it comes to risk assessment, I have a bunch of people. When it comes to risk assessment, it's interesting because when I speak to large groups, I ask people, what are you preparing for? And people will say, I'm preparing for an earthquake, or I'm preparing for a pandemic, or for an EMP attack, or for whatever. And I'll turn back to them and I'll ask a couple questions like, what does it mean, an earthquake? What is it? What's the difference between a 7.0? Let's start with risk assessment, number 1. The first Thrivalist step is risk assessment. And it's interesting because when I'm at big conferences, I'll stop and ask people, what are you getting prepared for? Thrivalist step number 1 is risk assessment. And it's interesting because when I'm at large conferences, I'll ask people there, what are you getting prepared for? And I'll get all these answers back. I'm getting prepared for an EMP, or for a financial collapse, or I'm getting prepared for war on US soil, or for an earthquake, or for a hurricane, or for some type of tornado. And when I end up asking them, well, a few questions like, well, what's the difference between a 7.0? And when I end up asking them questions like, what's the difference between a 7.0 and 8.0 earthquake? A lot of times they don't even know. And I'll ask them, well, what's the big danger about an EMP attack? You know, why does the Congress say after their big study that 9 out of 10 people will die within 12 months with an EMP attack? They're like, I have no clue. And it's interesting because risk assessment is more than just knowing what you're preparing for. You got to really know what you're preparing for. You got to get into it. You got to study it. And in fact, in the course, in this section, the risk assessment section, I actually take the time to do most of the studying for you. You just watch a video and learn about the whole topic. And then you got to go and do your local studies, right? You got to get into the city, or to the school district, or to the state, or the county, and find out what have they done to get prepared for that type of emergency. And that's up to you. So when we get to the risk assessment section, there's only a certain amount of risks that you can put your arms around, and you can actually look at them and say, oh yeah, here they are. There's not a ton of risks outside that list, and you can see on the screen here the risks that we'll be going through. Obviously, I put zombie attack at the bottom. You've got big pandemics, you got avalanches, fires, tornadoes, tsunami. You got big pandemics, avalanches, fires, tornadoes, volcanoes, mudslides, earthquakes. You even have zombie attacks. I mean, what's a good emergency preparedness class without zombie attacks, right? You even have zombie attacks. What's a good preparedness course without talking about zombies, right? But the cool thing is, in this part of the course, you actually don't have to go through every single one of them. You're going to pick the ones that are most important to you, the ones that you're most worried about, and those are the ones you're going to study. You're going to make this course yours, not mine, not anybody else's. It's going to be yours. So different people have different worries or concerns when it comes to emergencies. You're going to find out what yours are, and you're going to go deep. That's what the risk assessment does. The second step is The second thrivalist step is sudden emergencies and evacuations. This one is quite unique because out of the rest of the steps, numbers 3 through 7, those all have to do with staying home, sheltering at home during emergency, because the reality is in most emergencies, people never leave the house, right? They don't have to leave the house. So the big part of the course is teaching you how to survive at home for long term, create your community, find protection, all that stuff, and have the supplies, the skills, and everything else. But thrivalist step number 2 is different because it teaches you how to react or act during a sudden emergency. And second of all, it teaches you how to get out of the house if the house becomes unsafe. Either the house is going to fall down or has burned up or whatever. And the environment Thrivalist step number 2 is a little bit unique. It has to do with sudden emergencies and evacuation. Thrivalist step number 2 has to do with sudden emergencies, what to do during a sudden emergency. Thrivalist number 2 has to do with sudden emergencies and evacuations. It's a bit unique because the rest of the steps, numbers 3 through 7, have to do with sheltering at home, what to do if there's a long-term emergency and you need to stay home for a long period of time, how to survive a long-term emergency. In fact, most emergencies, you're never going to leave the house unless the house becomes unsafe or the environment, like the people or the air or something, becomes unsafe and you have to leave the house. Well, step number 2, thrivalist step number 2, talks about sudden emergencies, what to do, and how to survive if you need to leave the house. It gives you the rules of 3, right? The survival steps, rules of 3. Thrivalist step number 2 has to do with sudden emergencies and evacuations. It's a bit unique from the rest of the course because numbers 3 through 7 have to do with sheltering at home, what to do to survive long-term emergencies at home. And the reality is most emergencies, you're never going to leave the house, okay? Almost every emergency in the world, you stay at home. But there are times that you need to evacuate. So step number 2 is going to teach you how to act during a sudden emergency so you don't die during a sudden earthquake, for example. But also, if you need to leave the house, where do you go? What do you do? How do you survive? And that's what step number 2 does. Step number 2 is going to teach you how to survive the first 3. Step number 2 is going to teach you how to get through the first 3 seconds to the first. Step number 2 is going to teach you how to get through the first 3 seconds to the first 3 weeks of a sudden emergency. It's going to teach you how to create the right emergency plans, get the right grab-and-go kits in place, know what supplies you need, what skills to be able to survive outside of the house for a while, and also how to practice those plans so they become second nature to you. The third thrivalist step has to do with the important water. The third thrivalist step has to do with water preparedness, super important. With water preparedness, you're going to learn how to keep hydrated. And the third thrivalist step has to do with emergency water and how to. The third emergency. The third the third thrivalist step has to do with emergency water and how to protect your The third thrivalist step has to do with emergency water. During an emergency, there's usually plenty of water, but during an emergency, there's usually plenty of water, but it's hard to find clean water. And so this step teaches you how to keep hydrated with clean water, how to calculate your water needs ahead of time, how to store the right water in the right containers, how to collect and clean water long term, and also the third thrivalist step has to do with water preparedness, how to keep your family hydrated with clean water, because usually there's a lot of water during emergencies, but a lot of it isn't clean. The third, man, I've been talking too long. Okay, the third thrivalist step has to do with emergency water. The third thrivalist step has to do with emergency water because during an emergency, typically there's a lot of water, but it's hard to find clean water, right? And you want clean water to be able to hydrate your family the right way over the long term. And so this teaches you how to calculate your water needs, how much water to store up, where to store your water, what type of containers you need, and how to collect and clean water for the long term in case you run out of water and you need more water. The fourth thrivalist step has to do with food preparedness, super important as well. And with food preparedness, there's short-term food storage and there's long-term food storage. There's also long-term food replenishment in case you run out of food and you need to get more food for long. There's also long-term food replenishment in case you need to figure out how to get more food during an emergency when you start running out, and also how to preserve that food and prepare that food so that you can, and also how to prepare that food and preserve that food so that you can be eating like a king over time, right? And also how to preserve that food and prepare that food during an emergency. And also how to preserve that food and prepare that food during a long-term emergency. Steps number 3 and 4 are a little bit unique because if you look at all 7 steps, you'll notice that water and food have their own sections. They kind of stand out from everything else. The rest of the sections have a whole bunch of different things inside it, but water and food are separated out. And I'm going to tell you why, because when we get to step number 5, for example, you're going to find about 10 different things in there, like sanitation and survival. When you get to step number 5, for example, you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff in there, about 10 different. When you get to step number 5, for example, you're going to find about 10 different things in there, a whole bunch of. When you get to step number 5, for example, you're going to find about 10 different sections inside that section alone. When you get to step number 5, for example, you're going to find about 10 different sections in there, just in that section alone, that talk about shelter and first aid and sanitation, hygiene, heating, cooling, fuel, shelter, entertainment, self-defense, safety, a whole bunch of different things, communication. And that is. And people tell me, Marcel, you can't create a preparedness course with 7 steps. You need to break out all of those separate needs into separate parts of the course. And I say, no, you don't, because those are other needs. And they ask me, well, what do you mean by other need? Because those are essential to life itself. And I said, that's why I call it a need, right? You need it for your life. But I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. When it comes to preparedness, food and water stand out because they are mental. When it comes to preparedness, food and water stand out from everything else for a big reason. And I'm going to explain it with a, and I'm going to explain it with, and I'm going to explain it by using an example from California. I don't know how many of you have been from, and I'm going to explain it using California. I don't know how many of you have been to Southern California before. That's where I grew up. It's amazing. You got the beach, you got Disneyland, you got Knott's Berry Farm, you got Universal Studios, you got all these amazing things you could do. So much entertainment. I grew up 10 minutes away from Disneyland, 10 minutes. You'll notice when you look at the 7 steps that food and water are a little bit unique. They have their own sections because when you get to step number 5, for example, you're going to find about 10 different things like heating and cooling, communication, shelter, self-defense, safety, because when you get to, because Thrivalist steps number 3 and 4 stand out a bit because if you'll notice, out of all the 7 steps, they have their own section, just water and food. And it's a little bit unique because, for example, when you get to step number 5, you're going to have about 10 different sections inside that one section. Things like self-defense and safety, first aid, health, okay, get out of there, fly. Thrivalist sections number 3 and 4 stand out a bit because they're quite unique. They only have one. Thrivalist steps number 3 and 4 are unique. It's just one topic, food and water, and that's it. Thrivalist sections number 3 and 4 are unique because they only have one topic, water, food. That's it. It's not like steps number 5, 6, 7, and other steps inside the course. Oh, it's hard talking just to a camera. Hi, everybody. Oh, all right, but I'm going to get this done. This is going to get done. We messed up yesterday because the resolution in the class was horrible. I looked at it and it just needed help. So that's what I'm doing right now is I'm re-recording before the store opens, before people get here. And I've got about 30 minutes to get a lot of recording done, but I'm going to do this. And so here goes. I'm going to start over again with this part of the introduction. Thrivalist steps number 3 and 4 are unique because they only talk about one topic where the other ones cover a variety of topics. And so it's just water and food and that's it. And I'll give you an example. When we get to step number 5, you're going to have everything like communication and first aid and fuel and shelter and heating and cooling and self-defense and safety and just a whole bunch of different things inside that one part of the course. And people tell me, Marcelo, you can't create a course with 7 steps alone. You have to break all those up into separate steps. And I said, no, you don't. Those are other needs. And they go, well, what do you mean by other needs? And I go, it's easy. Those are things you need to survive, but they're other needs because you can jimmy rig them if you need to during an emergency, or you can find people to help you and become a team. But if you don't have food and water in place, none of that other stuff matters. And they go, what do you mean by that, Marcel? What do you mean that food and water has to have its separate section? And I'll give you an example. I grew up in Southern California, pretty fun place, right? I'm sure some of you have been there. I'm sure some of you have been there before, right? I'm sure some of you have been there before, right? You got the beach on one side, you got Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, you have Universal Studios, Magic Mountain. It's just a fun place. I grew up 10 minutes away from the beach, 10 minutes away from Disneyland. It was a horrible childhood. I mean, what do you do for fun, right? And so if you can imagine Southern California, it's great, it's amazing, it's fun, but it's also a huge, gigantic concrete jungle, millions and millions of people all over the place. And what's interesting about living in Utah, which I didn't know before I moved here, is that I'm actually a person. I'm actually a name. But in California, I'm a number. So most people come home from work, drive right into their driveway. Most people come home from work, they'll drive right into their driveway, they'll go right into the house, close the driveway, never talk to their neighbors, barely ever get to know anybody in their whole neighborhood in California. At least here in the Utah, People actually know me by name. They talk to me outside and everything else, and that's pretty cool. Now in California, if somebody were to die a couple streets down in the neighborhood, everybody would talk about it, but nobody would. Okay, we're gonna get this done right. Thrivalist, Thrivalist steps number 3 and 4 are unique because they have their own section. It's just food and water, where the other sections have a multiple. Thrivalist steps number 3 and 4 are a bit unique because they have their own section. It's just water and food, and that's it. Where the other steps have a whole bunch of different items inside of them. For example, step number 5, we're going to go through heating and cooling, communication, sanitation, safety, self-defense, shelter, first aid. I mean, it just goes on. And all of those are in one group or one step. And that's called meet your other needs. Now, people say, well, you can't make a course, Marcelo, that doesn't. Well, people will say to me that you can't make a course without breaking all of those into separate sections. And I say, sure you can, because those are, oh man, I'm starting to sort of bit, blip, blip, blip. Yeah, I can do this. Hi, everybody. Okay. Sections 3 and 4 of the Thrivalist course. Section 3 and 4 of the Thrivalist course are a bit unique, because they have just one topic. That's it, water and food, where the other sections have a variety. Sections 3 and 4 of the Thrivalist course are a bit unique because they only have one topic to talk about, water and food, and that's it. Where the other steps in the course have a variety of topics to talk about. And the reason it's unique is because those two stand out in emergency more than anything else. In fact, when we get to step number 5, we're going to talk about 10 different topics or so about sanitation, communication, shelter, safety, self-defense. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. First aid, all these different things are going to be talked about. And people say, Marcelo, you can't create a course just with 7 steps. You need to break all of those out into separate steps. And I'm like, no, those are other needs. And I go, and they'll say to me, actually, well, but you need them to survive. And I said, yeah. Okay. Sections 3 and 4 of the Thrivalist course are a bit unique because it's only one topic we talk about, water and food. Sections 3 and 4 of the Thrivalist course are a bit unique because we only talk about one thing in each section, water and food, and that's it. Where the other sections actually talk about a variety of topics. And people tell me, well, you can't do that, Marcelo, because when... Jump. Okay, I'm going to do this. Talking to a camera just by myself is really hard. I like to have people here, and I like to be able to teach live people. But it's really hard to talk to a camera, but I'm learning, and I'm getting better. Here goes. This is it. I'm going to do it this time. Here goes. Sections 3 and 4 of the Thrivalist course are a bit unique because we just hit on one topic each, water and food, and that's it. Where, for example, section 5, we go into about 10 different topics, right? We go into sanitation and first aid and communication and alternative shelters and all these different things that we talk about in the Meet Your Other Needs section, number 5. And people tell me, Marcelo, you can't do a course with just 7 steps. You need to break out all of those into separate steps. And I'm like, no, those are other needs. And then they say, no, you need those to survive. And I said, yes, those are other needs, right? The word needs. And I tell them, the interesting thing is that in the mentality of preparedness, if you got to an emergency, food and water are the things that will actually make you stable enough to be able to MacGyver the rest of the needs or find other people to help you. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. I grew up in Southern California. I don't know if you've ever been to Southern California. Pretty fun place, right? Beach on one side, Disneyland on the other side, Knott's Berry Farm, Magic Mountain, all these fun things. It's just really hard to grow up there as a kid, you know, so many things to do, right? And the interesting thing about, and at the same time, California is a big concrete jungle. Millions and millions of people in, And at the same time, California is a big concrete jungle, millions and millions of people in one place, and you become a number, not a name. Here in Utah, at least people know me in the neighborhood and I know them. But in California, a lot of times you get home from work, you go into your garage door, close the garage door, and at the same time, California is a big concrete jungle. You get there, and at the same time, concrete is a big, okay, I'm getting distracted by people walking outside my door because I'm ADD. So wait for this person. Okay. And at the same time, California is a big concrete jungle, just millions and millions of people in one place. And you become a number, not a name there. Here in Utah, at least I walk outside my door and say, hey neighbor, and we talk a little bit and help each other out. But in California, a lot of times people will just drive right into their driveway, open up their garage door, go inside their garage, close the garage door, eat, go to bed, get up, go to work, and really never even get to know their neighbors. And at the same time, California is a big concrete jungle. You're a number, you're not a name. Millions of people in one place. And so people really don't know you. If an emergency happened, for example, and somebody died in the next neighborhood, people wouldn't even know the name of that person. They would just know what happened unless it hit the news, right? They wouldn't ask, who was it? What do they need? They wouldn't take pies and mow their lawns for them and do everything they do here in Utah, for example, where we have a little bit more community, even though we have less people, right? Jump and start. And at the same time, Southern California is a concrete jungle, millions and millions of people in one place, and you become a number, not a name. People get home from work, they go right into their driveway, open up the garage door, go park their car inside, close the garage door, and never even talk to their neighbors. Now, if you can imagine millions of people there, you're not a name like you are here in Utah where people know me and I say, hi, Joe, hi, neighbor, hi, Sue. And I get to talk to people, get to know them, and we help each other out. We pull over and help people change their tires and everything else. In California, if something bad were to happen, people kind of fend for themselves. And if and I'm going to give an example of what I mean by food and water by talking. And I want you to imagine that. Say there's a large emergency. And I want to be a little bit facetious here, but I want you to imagine that there's a million people in a circle and it's surrounded and I'm going to be a little facetious here, but I want you to imagine that Southern California, and I'm going to be a little, and I'm going to be a little facetious here. And I want you to pretend with me a little bit here. Imagine there's a million people only in Southern California, and they're in one little section surrounded by mountains on one side and water on the other side, and there's a gigantic earthquake. It just shakes the whole place, 7.0, 8.0, whatever it is, just gigantic, and it just shakes the whole thing, bigger than they ever could imagine in California. And in that morning, people come out of their houses, they're checking on their neighbors, they're making sure everybody's safe, and luckily nobody died, everybody's okay in the neighborhood. And they all get together and say, oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And they notice that all the power lines are down. It's going to be a while before they get power. So they all say, hey, our food's going to rot inside the fridge. Why don't we get together tonight at my house? Let's cook up as much food as we can, dry as much meat as we can, whatever we can, and just come over to my house. I got the biggest backyard and we'll just eat. Well, that evening, they get together at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, start eating, and right around 6:30, you hear the sound on the little emergency radios that a few people have. Beep, 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 beep. This is FEMA, and we're sorry about what's happened. If you are in Southern California, in this section with a million people, okay, here goes. And at the same time, Southern California is a big concrete jungle with just millions of people in one place. and you're more of a number than you are a name. People really, and it and at the same time, Southern California is a concrete jungle with millions of people in one place. You're more of a number than you are a name. People don't really care about one another. They're fending for themselves for the most part. We're here in Utah, at least when I pull over with a flat tire, 2-3 people come and help push me out of the way or help me change my tire. In California, that doesn't happen. In Southern California, at least, it doesn't happen as often. And so if you can imagine how people come home, go right into their house, close their garage door, and they never really talk to each other, but they just go to work and do what they need to do. That's kind of what it's like in Southern California growing up there. Now imagine that, let's just imagine that there's 1 million people in one section of Southern California, and one side surrounded by mountains, the other side is surrounded by water. They couldn't get out very easily during an emergency. And let's imagine that all 1 million of those people have exactly 10 days worth of food, 10 days. Okay, man, it's taking me a while to get through this part, but I'm gonna do it. Here it goes. Take a breath and stretch a little bit and start over and do this. And at the same time, Southern California is a big concrete jungle with millions and millions of people in one place. You become a number, not so much a name. Like here in Utah, if I got a flat tire, people would pull over, help me change the flat tire, push my car out of the way, whatever it takes to help me out. In Southern California, people don't do that. They'll call 911 or honk and say, get out of my way, or come home from a long day at work and go right into the garage, close the garage door, and you never really talk to your neighbors very much. That's just how it is. Now, people fend for themselves. So let's imagine, for example, that all of Southern California was a big circle with only 1 million people in it, and one side was covered by mountains, the other side was covered by water. It's hard to get in, it's hard to get out, and all of those 1 million people have exactly 10 days worth of food and 10 days worth of water, nothing more, nothing less, and that big earthquake happens, right? The big one, bigger than they expected. It comes out 8.0, shakes everything, but luckily your houses are still intact in your neighborhood, and you check on everybody that morning right after the earthquake, make sure your family's okay and everybody else's family's okay. You're all a community, right? You're helping each other out now. Everybody knows each other at this point because you're saying, what's your name? What's your name? Hey, how can I help? Your family okay? Everybody's really super charitable at that point. But come that evening when everybody gets together, because all the power lines are down, you can physically see they fell. The power's not coming on anytime soon. And you're getting together at somebody's backyard, the biggest backyard you can find, with all the barbecues everybody can bring over, because your food's going to go bad anyways. Everybody gets together and says, let's cook up the food, let's eat, let's talk, let's figure out a plan, let's work as a community, and everybody gets together that evening. But the scary thing is when they hear on those little emergency radios that a few people have in the group, you hear beep, 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 beep. Hi, this is FEMA, and we're sorry about what happened. There was a horrible earthquake. If you're in the Southern California region, we just got to let you know, all 1 million of you, we can't get to you for 3 months. You're going to have to survive on your own. We have no way of doing it because the damage is too hard. The airports are all damaged. The earthquake happened from Baja, Mexico, all the way up to Canada, and there's too many people in too many cities. So if you can hear this in the Southern California area, sorry, we can't get to you for 3 months. Now, what do you think is going to happen at that point in people's minds, right? They're going to be kind of a little nervous. They're going to go, haha, it's okay, we'll make it. But then they start calculating, we only have about 10 days worth of food, and we're not going to make it. We're not going to make it 3 months, and we can't get out, can't get in. If we even tried, the traffic would be so bad, there's just no possible way. And so that night, you get inside your house and you're a little bit scared. You talk to your husband or your wife and your kids and just say, we're going to have to really be careful, and people might get a little crazy during the next 10 days, and we just got to figure out how to make it and how to survive. And that night you hear pop, 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 pop. And the next morning, your neighbor says, Marcelo, come out the back door. And he pops his head over, kind of like Home Improvement, and says, don't open the door for anyone. Trust me. And I go, what happened? And he says, 2 officers came to my door, and they looked like they were hurt. They were all bleeding. I looked through the little peephole and I was worried about them. So I opened the door, and they weren't cops. They were actually, I think they killed the cops. And luckily I had my chain on, I had a gun on me, and they got scared away and ran. And so don't open the door for anyone. It's getting pretty bad. Well, 2-3 days later, you see fire in your neighborhood and you hear that one or two of the houses got burned down, but you don't want to go out and check because it's getting too dangerous out there. So you know that things are happening. Other people are coming from other neighborhoods. It's getting pretty scary. 7 days into it, you have 3 days to live, right? Things are really bad, okay? People are dying, people are screaming, people are knocking on your doors. They're pretty upset. They're trying to figure out how to live. They don't know what to do to save their own kids. Now imagine that situation, 7 days into it, you have 3 days to live, right? 3 days worth of food and water. And imagine at that point, I peer outside in the backyard and I notice, hey, on the next street over, there's a guy with ham radio antennas. Huh. I need to let my mom know in Ohio that I'm okay. So I sneak outside, go through the bushes, get all the way to his house and go, hey, are you home? Hey, can you open the door? And I listen, and it's quiet. Oh, but I hear a little bit of rustling. Hey, I heard you in there. Can you please open the door? My name's Marcelo. I'm on the other street. I know we haven't met or anything. I know we haven't met or anything like that. I know we haven't met or anything like that, but I need to use your ham radios to be able to. I know we haven't met or anything like that, but I need to use your ham radios to be able to let my mom know that I'm okay. Can you just hand the ham radio through your window or something like that? What do you think that person's going to say? Get out of here. We're dying in 3 days. There's no way I'm going to open that up. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're going to do to me. I'm not going to open my window or my door or anything else. Get out of here, right? That's the mentality, all right? Say, for example, I go down a couple streets and I heard about some nurse and I say, sneak over there and say, hey, open the door. I know you're in there. I know you're in there. I can see your cars out there. I know everybody's home. No, open up the door. My daughter, she fell and I need to just borrow a compression bandage just from you just to, give. Oh man, I'm getting tired. Now imagine, for example, now also imagine that I also need. 15 minutes, I can do this. Let's see. So it doesn't matter what I ask for. I can go next door to a nurse and ask her. So it doesn't matter what I ask for in that type of situation. I can go a couple streets down to a nurse who usually serves people at a hospital and ask her for a compression bandage for my daughter's sprained ankle. She's not going to open the door. Things are getting pretty bad. People are desperate at that point. So let's just switch the situation so I can show you how important food and water are. Let's imagine the same scenario happens. Million people, gigantic earthquake, but everybody in that whole million people has exactly 1 year's worth of food, 1 year's worth of water, no more, no less. But let's just imagine. But let's just imagine that all million people in that circle have 1 year's worth of food, 1 year's worth of water, nothing more, nothing less, and the same exact thing happens. Now let's switch up the scenario a little bit so I can share with you how important food and water are during an emergency, a long-term emergency, or even a short-term one. Let's imagine that the same exact thing happens, all million people in one circle, right? A gigantic earthquake shakes the earth, and more than they could ever imagine. People are safe, they come out and everything else, but let's imagine that everybody in that million-person circle has exactly 1 year's worth of food, 1 year's worth of water, nothing more, nothing less, whole bunch of dry foods. It's not going to go bad in the fridge. They've got tons of good food stored, right, and everything else. And let's just imagine they're good as far as food and water goes. Well, when that beep, beep happens and FEMA says, sorry, we can't get out there. Well, when that beep, beep happens and FEMA says, sorry, we can't get out there for another 3 months, guess what people do? It's completely changed. They go, it's okay. Let's work together. Let's share food, share water. Let's figure out how to get through these 3 months. You know, like the government's going to come in 3 months, but let's figure out how to get through these 3 months and help each other out. The funny thing is, at that point, people will figure out how to help each other with the other needs, with sanitation, with communication, with first aid, with you name it. Okay, they will help each other, or you can MacGyver it during that time. That's how important food and water are, because it changes the psyche of a person or a family during an emergency. People aren't desperate anymore. So that's why food and water have their own section where everything else can be combined. Food and water has to be separated out. So that's 3 and 4. Let's get to number 5, and that has to do with meeting your other needs. Now, when it comes to meeting your other needs, like I said, those are needs. You have to have them to survive. Okay, short term, long term, you need the sociality of people. Even entertainment is important. You need the sociality of people. Even entertainment is important. And so those are needs. That's prep step number 5. So let's get to Thrivalist step number 5, which is meet your other needs. Obviously, they're needs. They're important. You have to have them, but people help each other out, right? And so even entertainment, for example, is important because you need the sociality of people, communication, everything else. And that's super important to be able to survive a short or long-term emergency. Like I said earlier, so Thrivalist step number 5 is meet your other needs. There's a whole bunch of things you need to make sure you cover during short-term and long-term emergencies. Thrivalist step number 5 is meet your other needs. There's a whole bunch of things you need to cover to make sure that you can survive for whatever. Thrivalist step number 5 is meet your other needs. There's all, let's see, how am I going to do this? Thrivalist step number 5 is meet your other needs. There's a whole bunch of things you need to do to be able to prepare for other things that can save your life during an emergency. And there's about 10 of them that we're going to go through in the course. Next is going to be Thrivalist step number 6, which has to do with maintaining your standard of living. When I lived in Brazil during 30,000% inflation, I learned a ton of stuff, and I'm going to be talking about that in this step number 6, what I learned from that. A story about a hot dog vendor that's really cool that I'm going to tell you, and what I learned from him. And during this step, we're going to teach people how to establish a rainy day fund to create a hedge for inflation, to be able to buy extra household supplies, and to be able to create a bartering supply, a bartering system, things you can barter for skills or other supplies that you need to survive a long-term emergency. And finally, the last step is community building. And finally, the last thrivalist step. And finally, the last thrivalist step is helping others get prepared in community building, where I teach you how to create the right lists of people's, where I teach you how to create the right lists of people or groups to reach out to, how to reach out to them the right way, not being a nerd or crazy person out there, and how to get others involved, and how to develop your preparedness community. Because that's going to be just as important as and how to develop your preparedness community, because that becomes just as important as all your supplies in the end. So that's it. Those are the 7 steps. Those are the sequential 7 steps we're going to go through to be able to help your family get prepared the right way the first time. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. What is the biggest reason for catastrophes during a crisis? Think about it. The biggest reason. I get all these. When I ask this question, I get a whole bunch of replies a whole bunch of reasons why people, when I ask this question in groups, I get a whole bunch of different types of replies. But the truth is, the biggest reason for catastrophes during emergencies is simply because you're not prepared. As a fireman, as an EMT, if I didn't do training ahead of time, if I didn't learn skills, if I didn't have the supplies inside the rig ahead of time, when it came to an emergency, I wouldn't be able to help anyone. Does that make sense? I need to prepare ahead of time with the right supplies, the right skills, the right knowledge, the right community, the right people around me to be able to save people during an emergency as a first responder. The same thing during an emergency for your family. You have to prepare ahead of time. That's the biggest reason for a catastrophe. So in the next video, we're actually going to talk about what keeps people from actually getting. So in the next video, we're actually going to talk about what really keeps people from getting prepared. So in the next video, we're going to talk about what is it that keeps people from really getting prepared. You're going to love the information. So click on the next video.